Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the latest installment of the Tribal Scholars Speaker Series. My name is Joe Graham, and I'm the director of the Indian Resource Development Program, the IRD, responsible for coordinating this series. Tonight's event was funded by an idea grant out of the Office of the Provost. The IRD is a State of New Mexico Research and Public Service Program, an RPSP, housed on the NMSU campus. One of the strategic goals of the IRD program is to expose tribal students to traditional, wise, novel, and innovative concepts through the presentation of the work of tribal leaders, philosophers, and academics. In achieving the goal for the students, the entire local community is enriched. It is my pleasure this evening to introduce you to Ms. Heather Fleming. Ms. Fleming is of the Navajo people. Her hometown is Vanderwagen, New Mexico, and she is a graduate of Gallup High School. She attended Stanford University, earning a degree in product design. In order to apply her education in a fulfilling way, she initiated an exciting career helping others solve engineering dilemmas. In the Bay Area, she co-founded a group of Engineers Without Borders, focused on social impact design work. She is the founder and CEO of Catapult Design, a firm that designs tools and technologies for disadvantaged communities worldwide. She is a rising star in the area I would call activist engineering. Her presentation tonight is entitled Innovation for a Developing World, Technology, Products, and Human Ingenuity Capable of Igniting Social Change. Esteemed guests, please help me welcome Ms. Heather Fleming.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Please feel free to ask a question during the presentation. It actually helps me chill out a little bit too, if I can, just break it up with questions. So feel free, as I'm talking, to just interrupt. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it was such an honor to share my story with Native American students earlier today, the engineering school tomorrow, and of course with all of you. And I really want to thank the IRD for getting me here and getting this all arranged and taken care of. It's a lot of fun for me, and it's a pleasure. So I haven't lived in New Mexico for about 13 years now, but I take a lot of pride in being New Mexican. My identity, my beliefs, and the work that I do is heavily rooted in my first 18 years of life in rural New Mexico. I grew up in Vanderwagen, as Joe stated, which is about a 15-minute drive from Zuni and about, 20 to 30 minutes from Gallup. So I went to Gallup High, graduated in 1988. Margaret Campos Begay, who I went to high school this year tonight, which I think is super cool. And my mom is Navajo. She's Patani clan from Tis, Los Pas, Arizona. And most of my family still lives on the reservation. And I have a lot of memories of spending the summer out with my grandpa in Tis. And we would haul in water in these giant steel drums for cooking and bathing. And when the sun went down, we'd light up kerosene lamps and start up the cast iron stove in the center of the house to cook and keep warm. And as a kid, there was one of my cousins in particular that I really looked up to. Her name was Jeannie. She went to UNM and she became a civil engineer. She was one of the few folks in my family who did pursue higher education. And my mom used to send me to work with her in the summer just to get me out of her hair. And Jeannie became one of the most influential people in my life. She worked for the IHS in Winter Rock, and she used to put me in her giant Ford truck, and we'd drive out to these really rural areas around Venado, where she'd show me the tanks that she was designing to bring water to houses and to hogans that were in the middle of absolute nowhere. And that experience just kind of shaped my thinking a lot, because while I didn't know what it meant to be an engineer, I perceived engineering to be very tangible humanitarian work. To me, engineers built wells so that people who didn't have water could have it. And Jeannie, she pushed me to aim high for college, and with that encouragement, I left New Mexico and went to Stanford University in California, and I declared on my application that I wanted to be an engineer. But once I got to college, of course, I found I had all these other interests. I'd always loved sketching, I loved painting rocks, and writing stories as a kid, and I explored a lot of this when I got to school. But my sophomore year, I met the second most influential person, Martin Fisher, the founder of Kickstart. He came to speak to the engineering students in my class. And he showed pictures of these treadle pumps that he built in Kenya for poor farmers. And he showed pictures of the facilities he developed to manufacture these pumps in hundreds of thousands. He talked about how a tool as simple as a treadle pump could have massive impact on the GDP of a country, as well as the daily lives of a family. And this thought was revolutionary to me for two reasons. One, civil engineers, especially out on the res, they can build a single well that can serve thousands of families. But an engineer could also design a single product that, cheaply replicated, could impact millions of people. So the scale there was super intriguing to me. And the second thing was Martin Fisher's presentation. This was the first time that I realized that the lack of clean water and electricity wasn't specific to the Navajo Nation. In fact, the vast majority of the people on our planet live this way. So until then, I'd always could consider us the minority, but in fact, we're the majority. So I declared product design as my major. Product design is a conglomerate of art, psychology, and engineering. And for me, it was a beautiful blend of something practical, but something creative. And I loved this potential that it had for impact. Product designers develop consumer goods, so nearly everything you find on a Walmart shelf was designed and engineered by a product designer. And after graduating, I went to work at a design firm in Silicon Valley where I spent my next 6 years as a design engineering consultant for a variety of different companies. I designed TVs, remote controls, power tools. My friends loved my job, I have to say. But about 3 years into my career, two things started to nag me. One was I started to realize the downside of producing products in high volume. In particular, I became very conscientious of the fact that my job was filling garbage cans with stuff that people don't necessarily need. So, and each time we made, isn't this crazy? I did not design this, by the way. Each time we made, as a product designer, each time you make a seemingly arbitrary decision about wall thickness on a plastic part, about materials, about the weight of a product, that your actions are resulting in hundreds of thousands of tons of plastics and metals, things that will last on our planet far longer than any of us, far longer than our grandchildren too. So in fact, I wasn't really perceiving what I thought engineering was supposed to be, and I actually considered myself to be making the world a worse place with my work. And the second thing that bothered me was that I knew most of my relatives, that thousands of families on the reservation still didn't have things like running water or electricity. And aren't those engineering and design problems too? And didn't I, as a Stanford engineer, now have the skills to address something like that? But at that time, I didn't really think there was anything I could do about these things. So instead, I quietly started spending my free time reading about sustainable design and engineering, studying industrial ecology classes I found online, and attending lectures and meeting people figuring out how people were using technology to fight poverty and better the environment. And that's how I met the third most influential people in my life. As I was exploring these interests, I heard about Engineers Without Borders, and I attended my first meeting. EWB is a volunteer organization, international, focused on sustainable engineering in developing countries. And finding a place amongst my peers with other professionals who had the same interests as myself was really like a turning point in my career. This allowed me to turn everything that I was thinking about, my thoughts, as well as my skills and my passion, into action. And it's what put me on my path. So myself and another engineer, Francis Dumais, volunteered to establish a new team within EWB. It was the first team in their history to focus on product development for impoverished communities. And this was our first project. It was the redesign of a fuel-efficient cook stove for refugee women in Darfur. So every day these women were leaving the refugee camps to collect firewood to cook food for their families. And every time they left, they were attacked by the Janjaweed, armed gunmen in western Darfur. So an NGO in Sudan commissioned UC Berkeley and our team at EWB to develop a cook stove for the women that burned firewood more efficiently. And what that means, or burning more efficiently, means you need less firewood to cook. And if you don't need as much firewood, you don't have to leave the camps as often. So this project was a good testament for the impact that a single product could have on the lives of these women. Over the next 2.5 years, we had a growing line of organizations that wanted to employ our services, and our volunteer numbers just exploded. So Francis and I witnessed firsthand this gap in technical skills and international development. Engineers were direly needed in this space. And at the same time, we were getting so much press and recognition in the media, ABC News, Wired Magazine, Newsweek. But at the end of the day, we weren't getting the job done. If the objective of aid and development is to improve the lives of poor people, then we were not successful. And I'll explain why. But it was this realization that we were failing that improved our team's understanding of what it means to design and develop new technologies in impoverished areas. So, I mean, personally, I found that I had the skills to develop quality products and the skills to lead a team, but that wasn't enough to make a product successful. So I'm going to show you this really quick 2-minute video from about 2 years ago. It was about a project that we worked on both as EWB and as Catapult Design. It's an affordable IKEA-style wind turbine for rural Guatemalan families who don't have access to electricity. And the turbine produces just a small amount of energy, 25 watts. So that means absolutely nothing for anybody in this room, but is game-changing for people who live in the dark. So...
Catapult is a nonprofit design consultancy. We work with other nonprofits, social enterprise, anybody who's trying to bring products to developing countries.
There's people that have no electricity whatsoever, no access to electricity. They're burning paraffin lamps or kerosene in their house, and it's like trying to have a Molotov cocktail sitting on the dining room table at all times. It's dangerous.
So this is a wind turbine. It's a vertical axis wind turbine, which basically picks up the wind and will turn it into electric energy.
The way it works really is when the blades spin in the wind, spins an alternator down here at the bottom, and that alternator charges this battery, and then people charge their electronics off of that car battery. Electronics like basic lighting for the home, or a cell phone, or a small radio, or a fan.
The reason people need a wind turbine is that they have no electricity whatsoever. They're completely cut off from the grid. So they have small electronics needs like charging a cellular phone or powering a radio, and if they don't have any electricity, they have to travel long distances and pay a lot of money to charge their appliances.
We did this test down in Guatemala where we actually built an equivalent wind turbine and was actually able to find all the materials down there and construct it successfully.
There are a lot of opportunities for innovation and creative thinking to help us live in a happy balance with nature. The wind turbine is a perfect example because we are producing renewable energy that will prevent other fossil fuels from being burned and polluting the environment, as well as it's designed to be locally produced so that it doesn't have to be shipped around the world.
Engineering is like art, because you're creating these things and it kind of becomes your baby. And when it works, it's just, yeah, something lights up, it's true.
Still clapping in a minute. I have to say, everybody loves this project. It was our poster child for a really long time. They love this blue prototype. They love that it spins. But this was a huge failure story for us. We learned a lot from this project about the challenges one faces when working in developing countries. So first off, we spent a significant amount of man-hours developing this tiny turbine. It's more of an engineering challenge than one may think. But what we didn't do was question what would happen afterward. So when we were finishing up the final testing of the prototype, we started training technicians in Guatemala on how to build a turbine. And after just 5 days with them in Quetzaltenango, it was very clear to us that the time and effort that we had put into this project was all for naught. It turned out that our client wanted a wind turbine for rural families, yes, but they had no way of building them at scale. No way of distributing them at scale, and no marketing strategy, and little capacity and budget to accomplish these things successfully. I'm not ashamed of this failure story because it was an invaluable learning experience for us. And in fact, 95% of technologies developed for impoverished regions fail. Never make it into the hands of the customers that they're intended for. Broken water pumps, abandoned solar panels, and this has been the case for decades. I realized that for us to be successful in our work, it was important that we understand why all of this failure was occurring. I also realized that to answer that question, we really couldn't do that just in our spare time as volunteers. So later that year, at the end of 2008, I did the most terrifying thing I could possibly imagine, and my parents too. I quit my job at the beginning of a recession and started a company with Tyler Valentet, one of my colleagues in UVB, who was also in the video. And we started Catapult Design, a design and technology strategy for catering to disadvantaged communities. And the people the rest of the world overlooked, essentially. People without a voice. And our company was the very first of its kind, and we had a vision. We wanted anyone, anywhere, to have access to quality design and engineering skills, to build a multidisciplinary team to address all these challenges that we have faced as volunteers. And above all, we really wanted to change this charity dynamic, because the problems that the world addresses through international development and aid, famine, malnutrition, lack of education, lack of clean water, these are very real, very important problems in the world that affect all of us. And to me, to dub that as charity is extremely short-sighted. So how does Catapult address all the shortcomings that we had experienced as volunteers? The first thing we realized is that we couldn't be a volunteer organization. Volunteer organizations serve a very different purpose than what we wanted for Catapult. We wanted to build an organization of professional, dedicated designers who were building an expertise, a career, on what it takes to successfully delivering products in impoverished communities. We knew it needed to be a multidisciplinary team, anthropologists, product designers, material scientists, mechanical and electrical engineers, marketing and advertising, user experience design. Because as we saw with that wind turbine, designing a product is actually the easy part of the problem. We can design a wind turbine. The hard part is getting the product to your customer and convincing them that they should buy it, particularly when we're talking about our market, which is people who make less than $2 a day and are extremely risk averse. The second thing we realized is that the 95% failure statistic was occurring because most aid organizations are so focused on the technology itself that the people that it's intended to benefit are completely overlooked. So for those of you who Googled Catapult design for coming to see something to check out, you may have noticed the word human-centered design in our mission statement. This is a reaction to that 95% failure statistic. Catapult starts out all of its programs by first doing everything we can to understand our end user, our customer. We want to understand the cultural and social conditions within which they exist. We observe their day-to-day activities, doing our best to understand their values, their decision-making processes, their needs. These observations and information helps us anticipate the fail points of the products. So this is kind of an example. If someone is consistently ill from drinking dirty water, our instinct might be to build them a purification device, right? This is what a lot of aid organizations do. Problem solved? Definitely not. So spend one day with that person and you'd observe them pouring that clean water into a dirty cup, or transporting it in a dirty container, or going to the bathroom and not washing their hands. The water purification device doesn't solve this greater underlying problem, and this is why you can never afford to focus solely on the technology. The barriers that these technologies face in impoverished communities are cultural and systemic, so we have to start with the people. Just for fun, I was going to take you on one of our typical trips into the field. We've worked in Rwanda fairly consistently over the past 3 years. Rwanda is in East Africa, and the people here were heavily affected by the genocide in 1994. So you'll find a lot of orphan kids, some of the highest rates of HIV, and Rwanda's population are among the poorest in the world. 96% of the population lives in rural areas. Many of these areas are almost inaccessible by car. The roads are terrible if they have any at all. And most people farm a small plot of land to grow just enough food to feed their families. Women haul water to the household from wells scattered throughout the countryside. The rural areas are extremely community-driven. People look out for each other. I love this picture. I was out on this several-hour hike once, and I was convinced that I was all by myself in the middle of absolute nowhere. And then this little 4-year-old girl just pops out of the bushes. And I remember thinking, what are you doing out here all by yourself? And then I just thought, yeah, that's Rwanda. I guess take care of themselves. And Rwandans also have very generous spirit. This is a country where neighbors turned on each other in less than 20 years ago. We're now rebuilding the country side by side. But there are still very massive challenges here. Schools and hospitals without electricity and often without emergency equipment. Pregnant women, for example, will set up camp outside a hospital during the last month of their pregnancy in case they go into labor. And many of these women may give birth by candlelight without much modern equipment to assist them in labor, which is part of the reason why maternal death rate is so high in African countries. One of the first programs we did in Rwanda was helping a network of 7 rural health clinics get set up with solar power, and it was a huge challenge. I spent about a month living in rural Rwanda assessing the electrical needs of these clinics, and then had to project those needs 5 years into the future so that I could design a solar power system that would last them for at least 5 years to come. So Catapult's client in this case were the clinics themselves, and we worked with them to vet solar vendors in Kigali, who would then source all the system components, install the system, and then work with the clinics for 2 years post-installation to make sure that the solar system was maintained and that the clinics understood basic energy load management. The panels had to be shipped in from the US. How do you deliver solar panels to places where there are no roads? These are the types of weird challenges that we face in many of the communities that we work, but we're able to successfully address them through strategic partnerships. The lack of infrastructure in these countries in general is both a hindrance, but it's also a ripe area for opportunity. So this is an example. This is one of our current clients in India working on a groundbreaking way for extremely poor people to afford energy systems like solar. In most places in the world, there are no banks. But even if there were banks, so few people make enough money to save it or to qualify for credit. So if you make $2 a day at your job, And can you afford a $200 solar energy system without credit or without a layaway program? No, you can't. So, our client has developed this simple regulator that attaches to a household and allows people to acquire energy on a pay-as-you-go basis. So now instead of that $200 upfront cost hurdle, you may pay kind of a flat upfront cost, say $20, and then make micropayments on the solar energy system through your cell phone, and each payment you make goes towards your eventual ownership of the system. Here's a glimpse of some other projects we've worked on. This is a $1 clean delivery birth kit for doctors and midwives in India. 50% of women give birth at home without medical assistance. I didn't know this before starting this project. We worked on small-scale rainwater harvesters for farmers in Kenya. This is a hand cart for rural farmers in Tanzania who need an inexpensive way to transport water and produce from the field to the market to their homes. So I'm very proud of what my company has accomplished in 3 years' time, but all the while I'm visiting family like I was yesterday. I see the same problems here as what I see in developing countries, but sometimes I think that maybe it's a little bit worse. So many of the families and communities that we work with abroad, they're entrepreneurial, they're doing what they can to make do for their families. There's not really a feeling of despair because they all know that the community will help them as long as they continue to contribute back to the community. Whereas here, you see things like alcoholism and gangs. It's a very different kind of poverty. And in my opinion, it's far more destructive than what we find in places like Africa and India. The common misconception about poverty is that it only happens to people who are lazy or people who are not very smart. When in fact, as a society, we create poverty with the systems that we put in place. And each year we often make it worse, not better. There is a huge gap in inequality between those who live in the United States, Europe, industrialized nations, and those who do not. The world's engineers, designers, and big companies develop products that can only be purchased and accessed by 10% of the world's population. That means 90% of the world, over 6 billion people, are overlooked by engineers and designers. So thinking about this, and reflecting a little bit as I put together this talk, I'm reminded that I haven't really achieved that goal that I had when I set out for college back in 1998. And that goal was to come back home and serve the people as my cousins did. But now I feel like I do have a very different role to play. There were 3 people in my life, my cousin Jeannie, Martin Fisher, and my peers at EWB that helped me understand my own values and empowered me to do what I wanted with my life, even if it was unpopular or didn't make me a lot of money or seemed too difficult to accomplish. My role now, I think, is to pay it forward, to inspire other people to make the world a better place for themselves. To help people visualize something better for themselves or their communities so strongly that they'll be moved to act. And it's not just my role, really. I think it's all of our roles. Jeannie taught me how you can turn your career into public benefit. Martin Fisher taught me about the impact one person can have. And all of my friends at EWB helped me realize that I could do something insane, like start a company at a relatively young age. And all of you, just by coming to this talk, have kind of reinforced in my mind that what I'm doing maybe isn't so crazy, and maybe that I do have something valuable to say. The greatest impact you can have is to empower another person, to help someone else achieve his or her goal. So if there's anything you take away from the talk tonight, I hope that that's it. And thank you for having me. I am more than happy to take any questions you have about Catapult, projects. Take it away.